Hello. This is Monday of the third week of Advent. We have lit one, two, three candles, and we're continuing Bartholomew's passage with the chapter titled Friends. As Nathan walked out of sight, Bartholomew knew he had better get to work. His job, assigned to him that very first day, was to help in the pottery shed, a large room tucked away in one corner of the compound. Going there now, he greeted his boss Ezra, an old monk who seemed to hate everything and everybody. Everybody except Bartholomew, that is, who had instantly found the one warm spot in an otherwise grumpy heart. "Good day, Ezra," Bartholomew greeted the old man. "May I fetch you a hot ointment for your weary arms?" Bartholomew knew that the potter had already been at work since before dawn, pumping the pottery wheel with his foot, while molding globs of clay into pots with his hands. "A most welcome relief that would be," Ezra said. His mouth was so used to frowning, Bartholomew had decided that no amount of smiling could fix it. But when the monk looked up and saw Bartholomew, his frown was a little less obvious than usual. Bartholomew fetched a dram of hot ointment from the apothecary and rubbed it on the old man's joints, which had probably made more pots than there are camels in all of Israel, he thought. Then he set to work at his daily tasks. His was the job of taking the newly formed pots over to the ovens, where another monk would bake them for several hours. Bartholomew had to be careful on the way to the ovens that he didn't damage the soft clay. After the pots were baked and cooled, he'd carry them to a storeroom at the other end of the compound. Once finished, the tall, narrow pots were used by the copyists in the Scriptorium to store copies of the Torah and other important documents. The Scriptorium, Bartholomew had learned, was where several monks sat all day and made copies of the Torah. Once he had gotten to peek in the door for a few minutes and had seen how the leader guided the other monks in copying a book letter by letter. Between the time he took the new pots to the ovens and the time he picked them up again, Bartholomew had only to help Ezra clean up the pottery shed. Then he could do as he pleased. On this particular day, it pleased him to make a new friend of the community's cook. "Greetings," Bartholomew said as he entered the cook room from the dining hall. The short, plump monk in his hooded white linen robe was startled and almost dropped a large pot of water. "Oh, child," he chastised, "do not scare a man so." "I'm sorry," Bartholomew said with a bow. "Forgive my trespass and allow me to make amends." This was something he had heard his father say often. He was never quite sure what amends were, but he figured he could make almost anything that could be made. The monk waved a hand as he hung the pot over the fire pit. "Nothing to forgive, no trespass made," he said. "Then let me make an amend anyway," Bartholomew said, and the cook monk couldn't help but smile. "I just came in to tell you that your food makes my tongue sing the praises of Jehovah and sweetens my stomach like manna from heaven." The cook stopped stirring the water, to which he had just added some rice, and stared at Bartholomew. "Do you know, you are the only boy to ever say such a thing?" he said finally. "Every day I slave away in here, steam in my face, sheep blood on my clothes, smoke in my eyes, and not one single boy of Nathan's has ever said so much as thank you." "I'm sure they like the meals as well as I do," Bartholomew said, "but they just forget to tell you." The cook started stirring again and said, "I care not for praise, but only ask a little appreciation." Then turning to Bartholomew, he asked, "What is your name, boy?" "Bartholomew of Tartake. And what may I call you?" "John of Qumran," he said. Then, after a moment's thought, he asked, "Would you care to try some fresh bread?" The shadow on the sundial had moved a quarter mark when Bartholomew finally emerged from the kitchen with a belly full of bread and several taste tests of stew keeping him company, which had been exactly his plan. He liked to make friends just to make friends, but if it sometimes filled his belly, well, that was okay too. The rule about eating only 2 meals a day was a difficult one for many of the community, he had learned, but his stomach seemed to growl extra loudly without lunch. Bartholomew's next stop was the Scriptorium. The monks here got to rest a few minutes every 2 hours to prevent mistakes from being made on the Torah out of weariness. He waited until such a break and then found the copyist he was looking for. "Micah," he said, and the Mike, who was about the same age as Bartholomew's father, looked up. "What is it, boy?" he asked gruffly. "I have been told that you are the finest of all copyists, and that you read better than anyone in the camp." The compliment seemed to have no effect on the monk, who said simply, "Yes, it is so. Why do you care?" "I care because my father told me to seek out wise counsel whenever I am in need of learning." "Tell your father he should teach you himself and not put his burdens on other men." Bartholomew lowered his head and spoke softly. "My father was made a slave and taken to Rome," he said, then raised one eye to see what effect what this had on the copyist. "So was mine," the monk said abruptly, "and so are many people's. Now go your way so I may take my rest." Bartholomew sighed and put on his saddest look. "Very well," he said. "I was hoping for well, never mind. I'll leave you to your much-deserved rest. I have seen how hard you work and know of your great skill. Such mastery should not be disturbed by a 10-year-old boy." The monk harumphed at the words, and Bartholomew bowed deeply and then turned to go. But as he did, he pulled from his tunic, such that Micah couldn't help but see, a big piece of fresh bread still warm from the oven, smelling fresh and tempting. The copyist gulped and gasped and said, "Boy, where did you get that?" Bartholomew now put on his innocent look and said, "What, this piece of bread?" Yes, of course," the monk hissed softly, looking around to see if anyone watched. "Don't you know it is forbidden to eat between meals?" "Oh, I don't think of this as eating," Bartholomew said. "I just think of it as a gift from Jehovah so that I may better serve him." Micah was staring at the bread, his mouth watering. Finally, Bartholomew held out the bread and asked, "Would you not serve Jehovah better with a stomach that does not complain?" The monk looked around carefully. Most of the other copyists were lying in the sun, their eyes closed against fatigue, or lined up to get drinks at a well. Seeing that no one was looking, he snatched the bread from Bartholomew's hand and scarfed it down in 3 bites. Wiping the crumbs from his mouth, he said flatly, "What is it you want?" "I shall bring you bread every day," Bartholomew answered, "so that your stomach will not hate you. I want nothing from you in return, and I will never ask anything of you. But," he said softly, "if you would be my friend and teach me to read, you will have the gratitude of my father." Finally, the copyist's mouth formed a small smile. "I have been selfish and cruel with you," he said. "It would be my honor to carry your father's burden in this thing. We will begin tonight for 1 hour before dinner." Bartholomew's grin seemed to stretch from one side of the camp to the other. May 1,000 camels find their way to your corral, he said with a bow, and may the rabbi grant you leave to see your family. Micah was shocked that Bartholomew knew of his request to the rabbi, but he simply returned the bow and said, "It is time for me to return to my table." He started to turn away, but then faced Bartholomew once again. "And please, there is no need to bring me bread. Grant me the honor of helping you without breaking the rabbi's rule." Bartholomew thanked the man for his generosity and then left. Ezra was still working, so Bartholomew decided to carve himself a walking stick. After walking so far on so many roads, he had decided he would never walk again without a fine stick to help him. A while later, Bartholomew went to find Andrew. His friend was just finishing up his own chore of mixing mortar for the workmen, and the two decided it was a good time for a swim. The Sea of Death was a strange place, as Bartholomew had discovered when he and Nathan had jumped in to escape the chariots. The water was all slimy and slick and made Bartholomew's skin itch when he dried off, but he liked the way the water did not allow him to sink. Trying to see who could stay under the longest was their favorite game, because the water kept trying to push them back up. This was because of the salt in the water, Nathan had told him, and Bartholomew spent many hours trying to figure it out. Andrew and Bartholomew splashed each other and played Dunk the Donkey for a good long time, and then finally waded out of the water to where they had left their clothes on some rocks. Their tunics were gone. Standing there with no clothes on, shivering in the wind, the boys were about to run back up to Qumran when the 3 oldest boys in the community stepped around the rocks. They were holding the boys' tunics up on sticks, and they also held hand-sized stones. Slowly, the 3 big boys surrounded the 2 smaller ones. "So, Nathan's little baby doesn't have Nathan to protect him," the oldest boy sneered. "Want your clothes, little boy?" he asked sarcastically. "Well then, come and get them." Why do so many adults look down on children and teenagers? Sometimes it's just because that adult is bitter inside. But sometimes it's because many teenagers and children have not yet learned to be unselfish. They want what they want, with no care about how that might affect others. But many times, children and teenagers have low opinions of adults too. Usually it's because they've seen some adults acting in very selfish ways. How do we overcome these stereotypes? First, by being sure that we are not treating others with disrespect by being selfish. In Matthew, it says, "Honor your father and mother." And then we can show them the love inside us that comes from the Messiah. In Timothy, Paul said, "Don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech, in life, in love, in faith, and in purity." Bartholomew has learned that treating adults with respect and honesty can earn him their friendship. Micah has learned that children need an extra special amount of care. Maybe they have both already learned the lesson that Jesus came to earth to bring, the lesson that unselfish love is God's answer for almost everything.